So first thing I want to do is just, he mentions in Eastern Orthodox and God, there's a real distinction between essence and energies. Now, a real distinction in scholastic philosophical terms is where an entity is really distinct from another. It can exist of itself apart from the other thing. In other words, the energies can exist of themselves apart from the essence. This is not what the Orthodox understand by the distinction between essence and energies. So it is not a real distinction in this manner. We might say it's something like a true distinction, or it could be something similar to a formal distinction of Scotus. But the categories that are normally set out don't really work for describing the distinction which is being spoken about here. So I just wanted to point out that we do not hold in the scholastic understanding or the philosophical understanding what a real distinction is, that there is such a distinction in essence and energies, such that the energies can exist of themselves apart from the essence. Now, I was just going to explain a little bit more what do we mean by essence and energies. What we mean by energies means operations, works, actions, with an implied power of that action. So when we see essence and energies, we should be reading essence and operations. So what we mean by that is a distinction between what I am and what I do, what God is and what he does. And as a human being, I can have a human nature, and in a human nature, I can read a book. Reading a book is something that's appropriate to my human nature. It's an action of my nature. I am reading the book. A human being is reading the book according to the human nature, as such as we can read with some intelligence and reason and make sense and store information of what we read when we are reading a book. However, the reading of a book is an action of my essence, which is an essential action. It's something that I can do according to my nature, but it is, and I can even speak, I am reading. So I can define my particular state at a particular time as one that is reading. But in so doing, my essence is not constrained to the action of reading. I am still a human being, even if I am not reading. I am still a human being if for some reason, due to some illness, I can't read. My essence as a human being is not the same as the act of reading, though the reading is something that is done by my essence. And the reading doesn't happen by itself apart from the essence. You can't have reading without a human being doing the reading. So the reading is always something that's associated with the nature. It doesn't exist of itself. It is an action of the nature. So that's what we mean when we're talking about energies. We're talking about the activities of God according to his nature. And also, when we say God is love, yes, his activity of love is what defines him, just as I can say I am tall, or I am kind, I am merciful. I can say that about a human being. Due to their activities, we can name them, we can define them and say they are what as they are of activities. Yes, we can describe them according to activities. God is merciful, God is kind. This is defining God according to his activities. Actually, properly, we can only define God according to his activities, but it's the only way we can know him according to how he acts with us. He is creator. Even he is God, is such. We cannot actually name the essence per se. There's no meaning to that. It's undefinable. And so when we're speaking of God, we are calling him names proper to his activities or the way we encounter him, how we meet God. So this is, and just as I can say that Mr. So-and-so is a postman, Mr. So-and-so is a doctor, because that is the job, the way we know them, and we can define them by those terms. Is a ruler, is a king. So this is a type of thing when we're talking about the distinction essence and energies. what we're trying to say. But the activities of God cannot be reduced to his essence. There is something distinct about them. And also with this, when we'll come up a little later, I think I'll discuss this a bit later, a bit more about essence and energies. But I will go on a little bit now. So firstly, to know the essence is really only possible if you are the thing of that essence. That is being that very essence. So in other words, I can know about a tree. I can know about the properties of a tree. I can see its parts. I can pretend to be a tree. I can do all these things. But I can't know what it is to be a tree without being a tree. The essence of the tree. I can't experience its essence without being the tree. So this way, we can't experience the essence of God without being God. We can know him according to his activities, the way he relates to us, his mercy, his kindness, his love. But in actually being him, no, we can't. We are human beings. We're not God of ourselves. So the essence is unknowable in the sense without actually being whatever that essence is. And so I'm just pointing this out. Then also when we speak about activities, later he'll bring up a comment, but I'll make a point that we sometimes, when God is himself in eternity, his activities are infinite and united. You can't talk about this activity, that activity, but all in a sense one activity. They are indistinguishable. They're all united. They're all infinite. Well, we only cannot perceive one infinite type of activity with God. However, when God relates to limited creatures, to his creation, then we can start distinguishing activities from one from another. We can distinguish his love. We can distinguish that from his kindness, from his mercy, from his judgment, from his holiness. These things can be distinguished according to us as human beings, according to our limits and our diversification. And in this way, certain activities of God are not eternal, such as creating. He doesn't eternally create. Creation is something he begins with by will. And creation is something he stops. He finishes creation. This is an activity that starts and ends. It's a divine, uncreated activity. He's not creating his activity of creation, but he begins it and he ends it. And there's some activities such as sustaining human beings, because we can't sustain ourselves apart from himself, that he begins and he doesn't end, because he keeps us forever, existing forever by his power. So it's a case of an activity that begins as a distinct particular activity and doesn't end. And as I said, there's some that start and end. That's because they are activities related and a diversification of his infinite activity according to our humanity. It's not that the activity starts, that he starts doing something more. It's a diversification of his infinite activities. It's a specificization of it. So we can start naming them as they become specific to creation. But they are not nameable in themselves in the infinite reality of God. But they're not adding to something. They're not actually, he's not stopping working. It's a way that his work, his infinite work, becomes manifest and is applied to us in our particular circumstance. And that application, that particular way it's working with us, can begin and end according to our particular status as human beings. It's nothing about his infinite activity starting and stopping or coming and going. It's about how his activity is infinite, is manifest in time and space to us. So I think this is another very important understanding when we're talking about activities beginning and ending. This is what we're meaning. It's their diversification to creation, their specificness to creation according to us, our diversified specific things, to our limits, to our beginnings and the beginnings of creation. So that's why we can talk about them in this manner. Not that God starts and stops his uncreated activity. It's infinite and never ending and constantly the same. But the way it applies to us, this is what the fathers are talking about here. And whereas all the other thing I was going to talk about as well, I'm setting it quite a lot, and we will just keep touching back into this, is that when God acts, obviously his actions have an effect on us. He can sustain us with his activity according to our human nature. We, in a sense, participate in his activity. And a matter of fact, because his activity and power is infinite, we do not have any power of ourselves, sort of that can be beyond his power. So all our power, all our life is derived from him. And even our existence is in a form, a participation of his power, of his own activities to sustain us. If we didn't do that, we would collapse into non-existence. So we ourselves, as human beings by nature, can only be human beings by nature if we participate in some form in the divine activities of God, in God's own actions to keep us alive. So these are uncreated, which is keeping the created thing in existence. And so there is a way that God acts with and through us. And the woman with an issue of blood touches the garment of Christ. She gets healed by the power of God, not by his human nature power, by God acting through his human nature, through the material that is attached to him, his garment even. And so we can see here that the garment becomes a vehicle and an expression of divine power. It works through the human activity. Doesn't mean that it's not a created power all of a sudden that God makes it. It's his power. It's his strength, his healing that has healed the woman, has created an effect. She is engaging with the power of God. And so we can speak truly of a human participation in the power of God without suddenly saying that the human being is by essence God. We can distinguish it because we're talking about the distinction between the activities and the nature. So it's quite important that we can talk about a participation and a necessity of us participation in the uncreated. Otherwise, we couldn't even exist. It would be impossible. We can't exist in some sort of bubble apart from God. We have to exist in and with him. So, but we are truly distinct from, we are created out of nothing according to our essence, but our activities need to be sustained by him, which is why when we come to a judgment day, there is an end of time, and our activities, what the deeds we do in the body and soul, are judged if they are compatible to those of God or not compatible. If they're compatible, we can continue to live eternally with him in harmony without denying him and his purity, etc. If we are incompatible, that is sinful, then he will close off his power to us to act. We will go into darkness, into hell. We will be prevented from acting anymore. He will not provide us the means to act. He'll withdraw that because we're using that contrary to himself. That is the whole purpose of hell, because the reality is we exist in participation with him to exist, and he cannot sustain that forever in a state contradictory to himself. He tolerates it for now. So anyway, I just set that as a framework of how we think in the Orthodox Church. And just to point out, we don't actually hold a real distinction according to the scholastic understanding of real distinction, that these things can exist separately. It's meaningless to talk about my activities existing apart from me. They have no meaning for that. And so this is the same as energies. They are the activities of God, the operations of God, which are distinct from his actual essence, but they are what he does. And they have no existence of themselves apart from him doing the actions.
Pertains to the nature of his assumed humanity. And of course, no church father taught the outrageously heretical Palamite theology, which is filled with heresies, including the false teaching that posits a real distinction in God between essence and uncreated energies. That false theology also holds that some uncreated things begin to exist, which is heretical anti-Christian nonsense that is contradicted by the councils and fathers. Now,
Kival, you want to say something about that?
Yes, I sort of touched on that earlier, but I was just pointing out about this, some things begin to exist. And just to reinforce that point, that's because when God engages with infinite activity. He's got infinite activity, but because we are limited, we got specific circumstances and things. There's certain activities of him that diversify and become specified. Specificized. I'm not sure what the got rid of there. To that particular need. And so when we're talking about that activity beginning, we're talking about that specific activity and that specific point for that specific need beginning in time, because there wasn't a need for that specific limited particular action to exist eternally, though it is a sense that activity exists in an infinite manner with all other activities. It's just a subset, it's a particularization of it. It's a part of what is infinitely there, but its particular way it's applied in a specific time and space throughout things, and the particular manifestation of the infinite activity of God, that has a certain beginning and a certain end to it. And it's his activity, it is the infinite activity, but it's the use of that infinite, that application of infinite activity to that particular time. So not like it's that an activity starts, comes out of nowhere and starts and then stops, and that activity is never done again. No, he's infinitely doing everything. It's all his infinite, but a part of that infinity is expressed in a certain way, in a specific need. It's that specific particularization of that activity, that we can say that activity, like God's judgment, God's help. This is not necessarily God not going to be judging eternally. It'll be a judgment. And so that has a beginning, and if God finishes his judgment, then we move on to the eternal life. But the judgment is something that is a part of his infinite activities, but in a particular way it becomes judgment, in a particular way that only has a specific context and meaning and a start and an end to it. It doesn't need to, in that form, that activity is expressed in that particular form vis-a-vis us, according to our limits, has beginning and end. So that's what we're talking about there. Creation, as I said, has a beginning and an end. He doesn't infinitely keep creating. He even says in the scriptures, 6 days, and then he rests from his activity. He stops creating. So that doesn't mean he stops sustaining creation, doesn't mean he stops creating the vis-a-vis new children, etc., as far as it goes. But he doesn't start making more universes. He doesn't keep bullying more and more stars and things. He doesn't make more and more worlds. And he finished this particular creation. He stopped. And it started, and it's a subset, in a sense, of the eternal generation of the Son. It's through the Son he creates. It's this sort of subset of his eternal existence and the eternal beginning of the Son, but becomes manifest in time and space according to his will, and it begins and ends, as it says. So this is what we're talking about. So I don't know what he is objecting to, unless he's saying that God is continually creating more and more universes and adding more and more stars and more Earths and more human beings through our procreative thing. He's not creating new atoms every left, right, and center, multiplying all these new animal species constantly. No, he's stopped that particular activity. So I'm not sure what he's worrying about here.
Divine essence is not the attributes or the energies. Leo the Great, letter 15, quote, "For that which is predicated of him is what he himself is, nor is that different from what the Son and the Holy Spirit are. And apart from this one consubstantial, eternal, and unchangeable deity, there is nothing in all creation that is not in its origin created from nothing. No man is truth, no man is wisdom, no man is justice, but many are partakers in truth, wisdom, and justice. Yet God alone is in need of no participation. Whatever is in any way worthily predicated of him is not a quality, but his essence. For nothing is added to the unchangeable one, nothing is lost, because an existence that is eternal is his particular property. Wherefore, while remaining in himself, he renews all things, and receives nothing that he himself has not given." End quote. As we can see, Leo teaches that every attribute predicated of God is in him really his essence. This is the true doctrine of the Christian Church, which was also formally affirmed in the letters of Pope St. Agatho, dogmatically confirmed by the Third Council of Constantinople, as we prove in our videos. Leo's statement is directly contrary to the Palamite heresy, which contradicts divine simplicity. For those who don't know, divine simplicity refers to the truth that God is not in any way composite or composed of parts. It is a dogma of the Christian Church, taught by the Fathers and affirmed by the councils. Leo correctly teaches that this truth about the divine essence follows from the fact that God is in need of no participation. If in God goodness or power or another attribute were really distinct from the divine essence, as the Palamites say, then only the composite of essence plus goodness or essence plus power would be God. But that's heretical. God is simple and needs no participation, as Cyril's third letter to Nestorius, approved by Ephesus, also teaches. That's why God is said to be his attributes. He's said to be love, wisdom, power, etc. Third letter of Cyril to Nestorius, quote, "But we do not say this as if the Spirit is wise and powerful through some sharing with another, for he is all perfect and in need of no good thing. Since therefore he is the Spirit of the power and wisdom of the Father, that is of the Son, he is himself evidently wisdom and power," end quote. As we can see, God is his attributes. Now in the following...
Okay, Father.
Yes, we're not disagreeing with that. Where, again, it's because he's talking about, he assumes that we have a real distinction, that these things really exist apart from each other. Therefore, we have some sort of participation, that they're a combination of different things. No, the activities of God are those of his essence. His wisdom is essential wisdom. It belongs to his essence. It is the wisdom of his essence. And he is the wisdom, he is love, he is power, because we can name him according to these activities, these energies, as we call them, because they are precisely because they belong to his essence. So here it's just, again, it's failing to make the subtle distinction between what the thing is and what the thing does, and that God of his being as God, well, even God is in itself and what he is what he does, because it's a relational term to creation or creature. His essence, obviously, as I said, is unknowable, because you'd have to be God to actually be it, to actually know it. And it's therefore we can never be God in essence, so we can never know his essence. So, but his activities we can experience, but they are activities of his essence. So I'm not seeing this, because he's got this mistake that we have what according to Western ideas is a real distinction. And I don't think when people Orthodox talk about a real distinction, they mean that the energies can exist of themselves apart from the essence, or that he participates in them. No, they are himself. The love is himself. It is derived from himself. It is himself. So we affirm all this. We're not saying God is made of parts. We can say that, and his energy is infinite and universal. So, and since one in his activities in and himself, so we're not even really talking about any parts at that level in his infinite self. What we can affirm is that he can diversify himself. He can limit himself in his particular actions, and then they become specific things that we can name specifically from our context, as I said earlier. But otherwise, we're affirming there's one infinite action of his essence, activity, and it's all perfected himself, not participation in anything. It's all from himself, of himself. And so, yes, it comes back down to he's making a mistake what we actually believe. And maybe some people are using the terminology unwisely. We want to affirm a true distinction, but when you put that into scholastic forms or philosophical forms, what real distinction means, you get wrong ideas immediately by using that. So it's partly a problem of terminology and expression, which is why I emphasize not energies but activities, because that's what we normally that's what we normally translate it to in English. That's what it means, operations, works. And the other thing is, when he talks about these councils, the Sixth Ecumenical Council is quite clear that there is one nature, one operation, and one will. It distinguishes between the three. It doesn't just say one nature. It says one nature and one operation and one will. And therefore, in this, the union of the Son and of God and man, according to the Son of God, there is two natures, two wills, and two operations. So it affirms all three distinctly. The distinction is made in the ecumenical councils between the nature and its operations and the will. If there was no distinction between them, they would not be making their distinction in there. And when we're talking about one nature, we're talking about one operation in the Trinity. We're talking about all three have the same activity, the same action, the same will. All three, because there's only one operation of God according in the three. And by the way, he said earlier something about divine person. This is another big mistake a lot of people are making. It's another topic in itself. We mustn't think that the hypostasis of the Son is a container or another object apart from the essence. The Son is his essence. There's not the attribute of being Son is a property that is true of his divine nature, but the property itself, being a son, can also apply to another nature. The property of sonship, being begotten, is actually something that is not simply divine. It is divine according to the nature of the sonship, that he is divine son, because he's got a divine nature. But sonship, which is the property, is not in itself divine. You can have a human son. You can have, therefore, it is truly a son according to a human son. So the property is equally true to our human nature, which is why we can have the incarnation, because the property of sonship is true to both natures. That's why he is one son according to two natures. That's why Mary is the mother of God, because she's Mary of a mother of the Son, and that sonship applies to both natures. So her mothership applies to both natures. She is a mother of both. It's the sonship, but the sonship itself is not something divine. It's not sort of a separate divine sonship from human sonship. Otherwise, there'd be two hypostases. There would be no union. So it must be very careful not to talk about a divine son. When we mean to say divine son, we can say it, but what we mean is that the son of divine nature. It's the nature that is divine, not the sonship per se. It's not some sort of container which holds the two natures together. The Son is God, and then the Son is man. So anyway, just as a slight thing which I can see a lot of people talking about, which just confuses things a bit more.
Yeah, I wanted to point out something from St. John of Damascus, where he says, therefore one should not suppose that any one of these things which are affirmed of God is indicative of what he is in essence. Rather, that they show either what he is not, or some relation to some of those things that are contrasted with him, or something of those things which are consequential to his nature or operation. He goes on to say, the names good, just, and holy, and alike are consequential to his nature and are not indicative of the essence itself. Those of Lord and King and alike are indicative of a relation to things that are contrasted with him. I wonder if you had anything to comment on that.
Yeah, so again, I think it's just confirming what I was saying earlier, that these names are relative to us, and they don't pertain to the nature. They are from his nature, that he is relative to us, king, and all these other things which St. John mentioned. But it doesn't speak to his essence as such. That is something that is our relationship to him, the relationship names to him. And that's the sort of diversification of his infinite reality in relationship to us, where we can start giving these names because they are pertaining to his particular way he relates to us in the various aspects of that.
Yeah, and even from St. Maximus, he says, therefore, absolutely nothing of what is said about God or the things around God can ever be the essence of God, for not even a positive affirmation, which is uniquely appropriate to God alone, devoid of all relation and detached from the energy around the thing, is able to manifest that thing according to what it is in its essence.
Yes, exactly. Oh, well, because in a sense we can only give certain names or certain things. If we were to do that, we'd reduce God to love. We reduce God to mercy. We'd reduce the essence of a thing to the thing which we're naming. But obviously, he transcends anything we're naming. He's bigger than that. We can sort of give him various names about them. It was all true, and he truly is love. He truly is wise. He truly is good. But we can't collapse that into what he is. He is something that is beyond that, which contains or has all these things together in himself in a unified sense. But he must be beyond any of these things. And what is beyond it is impossible to name. You can't accept the super essential essence of God, as St. Gregory Palamite says it, or other fathers say it. It's beyond comprehension. It's beyond, and because we can't name it, we can't comprehend it. It becomes ineffable and incomprehensible to us because it's infinite and beyond any mental grasp. But as I said, it's beyond anything we can about us, because it's only a pertain really if you are that, only to God himself, being himself.
Yeah. So again, I mean, like we were saying earlier, I mean, you just have to harmonize with, what the fathers are teaching, especially here, because they're using St. Maximus in one quote, then you can see St. Maximus in another quote, and you have to harmonize the two together. And St. Gregory Palamas isn't making this stuff up. I mean, he's relying on the fathers,
Yes, and when he has the councils, it's not like he's twisting everyone's arms. They're reaffirming what he's saying is the reason they approved him was because he was consistent. He had just demonstrated through the arguments in the councils that he was consistent with the fathers. If he wasn't, he would have been rejected as being an innovator and a heretic. But because he was consistent with it. And if someone thinks he's not consistent, that generally means that they haven't understood the issues or understood the terminology and what's going on. They haven't grasped things properly. That's why they're getting confused and saying he's not consistent, which is the same as sort of the monophysites or the various groups who don't accept Chalcedon. They struggling to understand it. There's not anything wrong with Chalcedon is saying. The Chalcedon is correct. It proceeds with what the fathers always taught. But the fact that there are some people who won't receive it is their confusion, their limits. That's a problem, not the actual teaching of the council itself. This is the same again here, is that if you reject this, the problem isn't the consistency level, it's your comprehension level quite often.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the last section here.
Who taught this Christian dogma? Palamas says, quote, "No intelligent man would say that the essential goodness in life are the superessential essence of God. The essential characteristic is not the essence which possesses the essential characteristics," end quote. That is false, as we've shown. Palamas also teaches the heresy that God is composite when he declares that the divine essence gathers the powers/attributes into unity. He writes, "As to the superessential, that is the reality which possesses these powers and gathers them into unity in itself," end quote. That is to teach the heresy that God is composite, because it means that the divine powers or attributes are not the one God in themselves, but are only made to be one in God by another reality that unites them, namely the divine essence. But what is united to one thing by another reality, and isn't that one thing in itself, is a component or a part of that other thing. Palamas's doctrine here would mean that God is a composite of essence and energies, which is heresy. We could give many other examples.
Okay, Father.
Well, again, there's a danger here when he talks about composite of parts. It is not that we can speak of God as God's love, God's mercy, God's kindness, God's judgment, and start giving different names to God. If therefore he's composite because we can give different names to God of the different aspects of God, different properties of God, and vis-a-vis to us. No, each of these things is grounded in his essence and who he is and his infinite being. They're only diversified in relation to us, as we said before. And when we talk about God being composite, we're not saying that he cannot be named according to these different names. So that he cannot be diversified in his infinite reality, can't be diversified. So we can name him in different ways. So when we're speaking of these as parts, we're just saying that he can diversify. We can diversify his infinite activity in such that we can name make these names. And in this sense, we can sort of speak a way of parts. But we're obviously not rejecting this, because everybody affirms that we can speak of these different names, give different names of God. But there is something about God which these names, even each one is truly a naming him and truly is God, is something that unites the things that are diversified in itself into one infinite reality. And that must transcend the things we're naming. So this sort of thing is not what the problem of parts is. Parts, the problem with the simplicity of God is that the part can exist in itself apart from God, that it pre-exists before God. Now, when we say God is love and wise, we're not saying that the love exists outside or apart from God, or wisdom, or any of these names we give to him, or any of the aspects or attributes we give to him exists of itself apart from itself. No, it can't exist. He's not composed of these things as pre-existing parts. These things only have meaning from himself as the cause and the origin of these things. So when we speak of love, he is love of himself. He is the template of love. He is the prototype of love. He is what love is. And when we love according to the love that is from him. It's not some but we can pre-existing him that composes him. If there's a bit of love floating around, no, we're not talking about this at all. And there is one eternal being and three that exists in its own perfection. And we see the diversification, as I said before, according to us. And so we can start talking about parts. And when we talk about those parts as a diversified to us, we can talk about something beyond those parts of God, because we want to affirm each one is God, that there's something aspect of God that unifies them beyond the bits in themselves. Not that these parts exist themselves and he's composed of them from as if I can say, no, they are attributes of him as he manifests in a diverse way to us. And this is where we get this talking of parts. And then that's why we can speak about the superessential, essential, the reality that sits beyond the things where we're experiencing and which we're naming. Otherwise, we'd collapse God into a multiple of gods. There has to be something that unites us beyond themselves and affirms that they all are God and a true participation of God. So he's making a mistake here that because we can talk about in diversive form, that these are parts as if they are self-existent and God is composed of them. That's a completely different thing. And no, none of his activity, none of his attributes exist apart from in himself and from himself and according to his essence and as united in his essence and united in his own being. So, yeah, so this is again making a mistake to confuse ideas of what is composed. Composed really is a problem when you've got separate parts that exist of themselves. No, God is the first existence of all things. There's nothing just prior to him. He is the cause and origin of the things. But that doesn't deny the diversification of things. And then us talking about that as parts relative, and then speaking about it in essence that unites those parts as we see them in a diversified form according to us. But that's not saying that that's how he is in his infinite sense, which is beyond our comprehension, because we can only grasp him in a diversified form according to us due to our own limits. So, yeah, I think he's mixing over different concepts and ideas here and trying to make an argument. It just doesn't quite work.
Yeah, would you say he's too influenced by scholasticism in a sense?
Well, that's part of the issue, but I wouldn't say it's too influenced by scholasticism as such. It could be some of the consequences of the ideas that the scholastics came up with, the result of their thinking, which may have been inaccurate, etc. So, and he may himself be not thinking through things completely according to their own systems. He might be making some mistakes on according to their thinking. So I'm not going to say it's just because of scholasticism, though certain things are influenced by certain results and certain ideas at the scholastic stage, which may not actually be consistent with St. Gregory, the Maximus Confessor, St. Gregory Palamas, and John of Damascus, and the fathers. Their thinking may due to certain limits, lack of inspiration, etc., may have gone wandering off. But I won't put a big general thing. It's a scholastic problem. It could be just his own personal things. It may be just the polemics is not quite putting the arguments quite and going through them in depth and seeing all the information, then pulling out what the distinctions there and seeing their own consequences to his own theology. So so I'm very wary of saying that scholasticism as a whole, which is a problem, though there's certain influences or certain things that's held by the scholastic movement or as continued in Thomism as well. So you'd have to actually say it's a Thomist particular view as distinct from something like Scotus or these other various schools of thoughts that go on there. So I don't want to get caught up in that. So I think it's best just to stay away from that and just say he's making this point about parts and stuff and not showing that he's going through the distinctions of what it means by parts, why it's a problem when it's there, and the distinction between the diversification of God from infinite one and to our perspective. He's not addressing these arguments. He's just putting things together in what I think is probably too simplistic form and not properly going through all the details. And perhaps certain scholastics may do that. I don't know. I don't know fully and deeply enough to make a general statement.
Okay. I want to pull up just some quotes here. It's from St. Basil the Great. And of course, he carries a lot of authority within the church. So regarding the essence energy distinction, he says, but the divine nature is too exalted to be perceived as objects of inquiry or perceived, or as objects of inquiry are perceived, and about things which are beyond our knowledge, we reason on probable evidence. We are therefore of necessity guided in the investigation of the divine nature by its operations. He goes on to say, there is then a distinction to be observed between the essence, of which no explanatory term has yet been discovered, and the meaning of the names applied to it in reference to some operation or dignity. And further, but how is it not ridiculous to say that his creative power is his substance, or that his providence is his substance, or the same for his knowledge? In other words, how is it not ridiculous to regard every activity of his as his substance? So do you think this goes along with?
Yeah. I don't want to judge on my handbook, but that seems exactly the same thing as we've been saying. And even the idea of a creation, which I mentioned earlier, and I was talking about the problem of creation, this is exactly what St. Basil's also mentioning. So it's reaffirming everything that has been said.
Yeah, so this is all throughout the fathers. You could pull up quotes from St. Athanasius, St. Gregory of Nyssa, St. Gregory Nazianzus.
If you don't do this, you just end up with multiple problems. You just, as it says, it becomes ridiculous. You just end up with sort of all sorts of ridiculous problems if you don't get there. As I was talking about creation, that's a substance, it'd be infinitely always created, and creation would be infinite with him, and there would be no rest from his creation. We would be just constantly getting used. It just goes on. And it becomes ridiculous. That's not what we see. It's not what we're experiencing. And that's not consistent with his own infinite reality. That would be something limited and stuff that has some eternal existence. It's contradictory. So, if we don't hold the distinction between his essence and his operations, which is what's all that St. Gregory Palamas is doing, we end up in a ridiculous situation.
Right. Well, I think that's all we have for this video. Yep. Unless you had any other closing statements.
I think that sums up quite. There's a very good quote from St. Basil at the end there. I think that sums it up quite perfectly.
Right. Okay. Well, appreciate you coming on again. So,
of the Lord.
Yeah. So have a good evening, Father.
And you too.
So until next time.
All right.
See ya.
All right. Bye for now.
Bye.